Okay, it's a little past 4 o'clock. Welcome everyone. My name is Danielle van den Heuvel. For those of you who don't know me, I am with Luca Bertolini and James Simmons, one of the founders of the Claiming the Streets platform, something we founded nearly 2 years ago after a long COVID period of chatting to each other about streets and public spaces in the context of the virtual world, as we do now. And we held a very interesting, lively, and exciting conference, I think, in 2022, where we gathered a group of different scholars, different backgrounds and interests, but all with an interest in streets and public spaces. And since that time, we've been trying to sort of develop this platform further. And one of the things we have reinitiated, because this is some of the things we did in COVID, is this series of talks called Street Talks. So I wanted to say a few words of sort of welcome and introduction to those of you who haven't attended this earlier, before we gathered largely in a very small group of people who know each other through UvA or through the conference. But we're opening up because we want to connect, and we want to see who's out there who wants to collaborate and to see what kind of initiatives we can work on together. So in that respect, I have a few important announcements, I think. One is that we are really hoping that more people will join our platform. So if you're interested in that, please reach out to us and sign up, because we can add you to the platform, to the mailing list, and you can become a member. The second thing is that we are planning to add 2 things to what is currently the website, which is mostly reporting on what we already do and what we've done in the past. But we wanted to start broadcasting, or at least not live broadcasting, but recording these street talks and distributing them on the website and posting them on the website to make it more accessible to people who can't attend the talks. And we also wanted to add another aspect to the website, and that is that all of us, or at least the organizers, we supervise wonderful MA theses that do turn up in a university repository, but tend to disappear in a way. So a second thing we're working on at the moment is setting up a repository for MA theses, in some cases also BA theses, if they're really interesting and good, and to post them on the website to make it accessible to anyone who has an interest in street research in the present and in the past and in the future. So this is also a call if you think, oh, I actually have a really good thesis that is already hosted in the university repository, please let us know, and we can happily post it on the website. Okay, I think that's the most important thing. The other thing you need to know, obviously, is that we are recording this talk. So if you are not happy with your voice or your face being in the video, then please be aware that you can sort of mute yourself and stop your video and ask questions through the chat. Okay, so now I'm really happy to introduce Caterina Villani, who is one of the people who was in Amsterdam 2 years ago. She used to be in Hong Kong, but she's recently moved to Ireland, to UCD. She is an architect by training, but works mostly now on the relationship between planning and policy, and currently also on experimentation. And she will talk today about a new project on street experiments in the context, again, of urban Asia. So, Caterina, if you're ready.
Sure. I hope you can hear me and the technicalities are solved. It is so nice to see so many familiar faces and some new faces. And this is a kind of a follow-up after some time and after the amazing conference that we had, seminar and conference that we had in 2022 in Amsterdam. So right now I'm connecting from UCD, the University College Dublin, but I am presenting part of my PhD and then postdoctoral research that was about planning and policies related to pedestrianization in urban areas. And especially today, I'm presenting an overview of a street experiment in high-density urban Asia. And I will focus on different experiences and trajectories, especially in Hong Kong. Today's presentation is loosely based on 3 publications. 2 of them are quite recent and were initially, at least probably in my mind, already partially part of the first presentation or the discussions and the chat that we had while in Amsterdam in 2022. And especially I will focus on a recent publication co-authored with Dr. Talamini at the City University of Hong Kong on failed street experiments in high-density urban Asia. And this is basically an image of a street experiment. This is not in urban Asia. This is in Parliament Street in Dublin and was taken in July 2023. And we can see how street experiments aim to reconfigure streets as more than spaces for motorized traffic movement and enable a temporary urban paradigm shift. So one point of this research is that such a shift involves balancing active mobility and public space uses in streets, while at the same time envisioning radically different settings and uses. So I'm happy that Anna is actually in the audience because I've borrowed this map from the street experiment tool, and I just generally, we observe a general geographical bias on street experiment research, but quoting a recent paper, 2024, by Carlotta von Schoenfeld, there are countless streets around the world that embody what street experiments are about without having ever been so designated or designed. So in my research, I particularly focus on East Asia, urban East Asia, and I try to look at the planning and environment in which street experiments are developed or will be developed. So connecting to urban China, one part of these projects, they're loosely connected to street experiments. So there are streets that are partially pedestrianized based on initiative to promote green streets, active and low carbon travel option in cities that are major cities such as Beijing, under an ecologically sustainable urban renewal initiative that include some campaigns to create livable living environments, especially in traffic arteries. So are these projects street experiments? Well, these projects tend to be massive and fixed in terms of measure to divert car traffic. These are some research, some slides and some calculation just done by my students in China, where I teach part of my courses. And if we look at the type of project, these are massive projects and quite not temporary in terms of a time span. At the same time, in urban Asia, especially in high-density China, we see an increase of urban experimentalism. This urban experimentalism has been surging, especially in East Asia, and micro-regeneration, Weigensau, is fostered as an alternative to large-scale urban renewal, or tabula rasa. So urban studies scholarship that I've also engaged with defines such projects as small-scale, heritage-oriented, and participatory-inspired experiments in infill redevelopment. Other urban design scholars look at these as design fixes aligned with state interest. So in general, there are some differences with street experiments. I look at the balancing act that is deemed radical due to it considering the actual state of mobility and public space, while at the same time envisioning a future and radically different mobility and uses in street. So streets, especially street experiments, need to fulfill and accommodate different uses. And when different uses become evident, conflict may arise and require some institutional intervention. And this type of intervention may take different trajectories. So my research is on the planning environment in which street experiments occur, and extend the spatial scope of research in order to identify planning and regimes within which Asian urban experiments are implemented, and especially their trajectories in Hong Kong. So based on the concept of trajectories and the research on them based on Savini and Bertolini, I focus on the historical perspective, and I analyze the planning context and the institutional action that follow the experiments. I generally note a limited extension of this measure in Asia, so there is a large spatial scope for research. And more practically, I focus on two questions. So how do planning processes acknowledge the different mobility and public space roles specific to the use of urban streets? At the same time, what are the barriers that may influence the trajectories of street experiments when urban streets are repurposed? So I focus on Hong Kong for three reasons, mainly because it is a high-density city, it is a transit city, and a global neoliberal city. It is one of the world's lowest private motor vehicle shares at 12%, and pedestrian travels complement public transport one. At the same time, there is a limited quantity and quality of public space. For the last point, there are intense pro-growth policies and large privatization of public space. We also observe in the city a large socio-economic and spatial polarization, and a general laissez-faire approach in planning. So I focus in our latest publication on the historical overview, on the pedestrianization policy, and on the trajectories connected to them. For the first part, we collected an inventory of city-level pedestrianization planning documents spanning from the 1990s to the 2022. While for the trajectories, based on the identification of 4 cases representing street experiment trajectories, we derived a review of the planning measures, and we examined them throughout the part B of the research. At the same point, we conducted semi-structured in-depth interviews with very highly knowledgeable stakeholders as planning, urban designers, and policymakers in Hong Kong. So I will not go through the historical review of all the pedestrianization policy in Hong Kong, because otherwise we could speak for other 2 hours actually, and it might be a little bit too long. But the main point is a change in the in the planning and a change in the stakeholders involved in planning. So the actors and the institutions that were involved in pedestrianization measure have changed over time, but largely they remain. Pedestrianization remains a measure to control vehicular traffic until very recently, and the most recent study included a more experimental approach to pedestrianization. And let's say that it extended the rounds of public engagement and online consultation processes. So the initial quote of one of the transport department planners related to pedestrianization was very depressing, at least for a young urban designer, as I was when I was doing my PhD. And while referring to pedestrianization, he was mentioning that the main idea was that by closing some of the side streets to vehicles, you enhance the efficiency of vehicular traffic on the main street, thus reducing traffic congestion. So this was considered a win-win situation for pedestrians and car owners. So of all the trajectories that we identified, I will focus on the two extreme trajectories that are the marginalization and the suppression. So for the first one, I will focus, that is marginalization, I will focus on Chater Road. Chater Road is a street that was pedestrianized in the 1980s by by initiative of private landowners, mainly the tenants, the owners and the tenants of the shopping malls and hotels that face the street. And the main idea was to promote the commercial interest and revive a downtown area that was emptied during the weekend. Well, quite soon, the street became a meeting place, a well-known meeting place for migrant domestic workers that reclaim the pedestrianized space and include some areas where sitting and enjoying their leisure time is quite visible, and large groups of women, especially, gather during the Sunday under the shading and under umbrellas. So this more or less contributes to an alternative public space and a quite unique expression of migrant urbanism in the city. However, the trajectory of the street is quite similar to that of marginalization. So similar initiative that target areas that are not of high pedestrian flow and that are not limited in size, they're not repeated. So similar initiatives targeting location with a low pedestrian flow are not even considered elsewhere in the city. And so while discussing the newest pedestrianization approach and pedestrianization study that was taking place in Hong Kong, this was one of the main points when discussing the areas that would need to be pedestrianized. And the second case is the one of Sayanchai Street South. So this area is in a high-density commercial district in a very old neighborhood, and initially it was pedestrianized to separate the car traffic from pedestrian. But progressively, with time, the public space made available was informally transformed into a performance stage. This was informal because there was not a management of the street or not any license required to performers. Sorry. So singers, buskers, and a large variety of street performers took the space. And a large number of audience and visitors from the low-income districts nearby really followed. However, the street was closed, was actually reopened to traffic following a long, let's say, a long quid pro quo of complaints between tenants, residents, and performers. So much that all the pedestrian studies that followed the pedestrianization of Silent Choice Street always refer to this study as a case that should not be replicated. So in the mind and in the, let's say, in the voice of planners, this street is considered a negative case, so that the main idea is that the role of street management should be more regulated, and the regulation and management is considered as the most important part of pedestrianization, rather than the pre-planning of uses and users in the street. So the lesson that is learned from this case is expected to influence highly controlled pedestrianized space implementation, and also programs and activities management by the local government. So overall, the trajectories of pedestrianized streets highly influence in direct and indirect way pedestrianization planning in Hong Kong. So both cases, for example, displayed the potential of temporary pedestrianization to provide settings for very diverse uses and users, and also active mobility. But institutional evaluation of the measure that was initially satisfactory in both cases then turned to institutional actions on the unplanned uses that emerged from the streets. So the suppression of the second case, Silent Choice Street, required a long consultation and it lasted for years. More stakeholders also opposed this measure. While Chater Road is in a permanent temporariness, so social practices, they do exist, but in a constant state of tension, and fewer stakeholders oppose the use of the street. So also in one case, street performances really encroached the noise regulation and pedestrian obstruction, hawking, falling in clear areas of street management and control for Silent Choice Street. And as lasting thought, I would say that there are some considerations that were barriers in both cases. So first, the scope of pedestrianization, the institutional and non-institutional stakeholders that were involved, the risk aversion tendency that is typical not only of Hong Kong, but of different Asian cities, largely tokenistic approach to participation. All are barriers that are encountered in Hong Kong, but also in other street experiments across East Asia. So street experiments in general remain fragmented efforts to materialize public uses in streets and are disconnected from more long-term active mobility strategies. The experiments that are assimilated and replicated in other urban areas of Hong Kong tend to be rather connected to the commodification of public space and urban redevelopment. And so I don't want to finish my talk with this negative considerations. So I would say that larger consideration should be given to emerging social activities and uses, and co-producing space could really change the trajectories of future street experiments, not only in Hong Kong, but largely in East Asian cities. And I hope I didn't take too long for this. So I would like to thank all of you for being virtually here. And I would like also to invite you to keep updated with some recent projects that are related to actually part of street experiments, and that will take place nearer to Amsterdam, or at least in Europe this summer. So thank you all, and I'm happy to reply to any question, comment, or feedback.
Thank you, Caterina. This was wonderful, and I think for me it generated lots of questions. So I hope that goes for the others as well. And it was perfectly timed because we have a lot of time for questions and discussion. If I could answer a quick or ask a quick question, you had this tag and this project on your website just now,
Sure.
or on your slide just now about children's parklets, I think. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Yes, sure. So we are trying to connect to recent scholarship on epistemic justice and street experiment. So with a colleague that is Kriti Gera from the Royal College of Art, we are trying to involve children in a vulnerable area of London in the creation of parklets. So we will have a participatory workshop this summer, and I will definitely keep you updated and be in your include all of you in this mailing list related to this project, if you want.
No, it is wonderful, and it made me think of the Her City initiative as well. The gender component there is obviously also interesting. Okay, I'll open the floor for questions. I can't see you all at the same time, so please do raise a virtual hand if you want to ask a question or have a comment. Yeah, Anna? No.
Well, thank you very much, Caterina, for the nice talk. And more than a question, just a comment, like from also the research or what I have seen also by experience. I think it's very important when you talk about street management or public space management. I think it's really important for a street experiment, but also it's very exhausting. And the question is, who should be doing this? Because, for example, when these experiments come from like a bottom-up approach, it is very, I don't know, unfair to expect that residents are doing or the initiators are doing that for the city. And I think here we need a lot of support. Yeah, actually from the sorry, I have a sign here from Zoom. So, we need more support from the city in order to do that, because sometimes we don't have the tools, sometimes we don't have the time as well. It's a full-time job, and I think this is something that we should be tackling and maybe demanding more from the city side.
Indeed, I agree. I think of course, in these streets, there are larger, I would say, urban questions that are related, that are probably not only related to street management, but probably to spatial justice or who has right to the street and to the city. So I would say street management is definitely something that is really practical and must be considered. But at the same point, trying to have a more participatory approach while planning the street experiments, and also, let's say, involving the voices of all the stakeholders or people who might be interested in using the street, not only in the design phase, but also in the larger question of why to pedestrianized, giving more space to public uses is important. So usually in the case of Hong Kong, the participatory approach is quite informative or sometimes even tokenistic. So the participatory part is usually related to the color of the bollards, or the color of the bench, or the color of the of some of the spaces that need to be pedestrianized. So that is really a limitation.
Yeah.
Okay. I see that Vikas also raised his hand for a question or a comment. Vikas?
Yes, thank you, Caterina, for a nice and short talk. But I think can you go back to one or two slides? There are two words you used together, I think, very interestingly. And I just wanted to make sure I don't say them incorrectly. But I thought that was particularly interesting in the context of what you were talking about. I'm trying to find, yeah, there we go. The last sentence here, the last bullet point, the permanent temporariness.
Sure.
I thought that was very interesting because it's actually true. It's a good characterization. I've never thought of it that way because certain things, it seems, become accepted, even if they haven't gone through the processes that are typically sort of the in legalese that they have to go through. So can you talk a little bit more about what may have happened on this road for it to become this permanent temporariness?
Sure. Cheetah Road is a widely established cultural landscape in Hong Kong. And quite interestingly, it was something that actually raised the interest of policymakers and actually helped maintaining the road. Was a academic conference that took place in Hong Kong. And while policymakers were presenting Cheetah Road as an example of challenges related to hygiene or negative local environment, the presenters that were, let's say, not the presenters, but the audience or other academic figures that were in the audience actually raised the topic of the richness of the street and how it is important to have in every city some cultural landscapes and some areas where migrant can make use of the space, can decide the use of the space, and can reclaim their right to the space. So Cheetah Road is an area where this happens, and it happens only once a week during Sunday, where when the migrant domestic workers, who are mainly women in Hong Kong, reclaim the streets, and they use that in a, let's say, just in a temporary way for dancing, for leisure activities, for performing, demonstrating, for let's say connecting to their family, because some of them have also families in Hong Kong. So this is something that I would say any street experiment worker or scholar should study in terms of how well organized is the area, or how much the area changes from Saturday night to Sunday morning. But still, this is temporary. So it is only on Sunday, and it is let's say tolerated only for one day per week. So it is permanent in the sense that it is every Sunday. Everyone knows that that street will be part of migrant urbanism in the city, and that street will be for migrant domestic workers activities during the weekend, but at the same time is temporary because it is only one day, and then after Sunday finishes, migrant domestic workers go back to their sort of invisibility in the city. That is not only in terms of space, but is also often in terms of right and in terms of their role as a vulnerable worker in the city.
Any other questions? If I may, I have a question following on from that. Really two questions, and one was related to this slide, because there's this also in the last bullet point, there's a talk of tension on the one hand, and then also fewer stakeholders who are opposed. And then I was thinking, comparing these two cases, I wondered, and in a way you've already sort of partly answered this, I think, what the relationship is between the tension and the opposition, and the people who actually occupy these spaces, permitted or not permitted, and their identities. And I was thinking also from the mindset of a historian about domestic servants and about the relationship between servants and their employers, and how it's quite a paternalistic system as well. So in a totally different context, we see also in Amsterdam, in the situation that Bob Pierik has researched, a lot of support for domestic servants also in all kinds of conflicts. So I was wondering to what extent that kind of dependency on both sides helps it make more permissible in a way, alongside the temporariness, the fact that it's only on a Sunday. And the other thing I was also wondering, that's maybe a separate. So related to that, the question is whether the other street has a totally. I can imagine that group is very different, the group of people there. And a second question is, maybe, I don't know if you can answer it, but I was wondering about the deep roots of these kinds of practices in Hong Kong. So do you find any evidence of particular forms of street use in these contexts being allowed or not allowed because it's a sort of custom and people have sort of accepted it as being part of the city?
Wow, I think I could write a PhD thesis based on these questions. But I mean, I don't know if I could, but I wish I had the time to actually write another PhD thesis about this. So on the first point, that is the reliance of actually the city or different Asian cities' reliance on domestic work, and how this is connected to the tension and the permanent temporariness of the street is it is an extremely interesting question, because of course the question that is connected to what if we close the street, what if we don't have the street in the city, would create a kind of a massive question in Hong Kong, but also in other cities that rely on care work for almost everything. So that would be what are the other options, and how are other options catering to large groups, or catering to people who don't have the same economic power or the same kind of funding and economic availability of the middle class, or of the other middle class groups. So the street was actually closed, or like the activities in the street were just highly limited during COVID, and that that influenced, or that made the other areas of the cities being occupied or being reclaimed by migrant domestic workers. So, for example, neighborhood parks or the areas just under the buildings where they work. And the amount of complaints and amount of tensions that were related to this kind of shift was really massive and huge. So the tensions are still present, and every day, let's say every Sunday, they're visible in the street. But the let's say the alternative would require questioning recognition justice in the city, and how to create more spaces that are public and that are for groups that really need public space in the city, or need more space in the city, for activities that are actually different from the activities that the let's say the middle class Hong Konger do for leisure or during the weekend. Then for the I would say the other question, of course, that is related to the other groups that were present in the second street. Actually, they are more diverse, and they are local groups in the sense that they are performers, or they are groups of Hong Kongers that were just let's say either performing or spending time in the street. I would say that the main problem, main problems and issues appeared on the street when groups started doing karaoke in the street, and at the same time these groups were of I would say older adults from nearby neighborhoods, and the area became extremely interesting for an urban, I would say an urban scholar, but of course extremely different to manage, and extremely different from Chater Road, in the sense that there were more stakeholders involved, especially residents, small tenants, and it was in a, let's say, also in a more local area of the city, or area that was also visited by locals. So it was really difficult to extremely difficult to manage, and extremely difficult to plan, although there was no planning for these activities actually.
Yeah.
And related to the third question, that is on the street uses in the city, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, that was mostly about the deep roots, whether there are historical patterns that you see emerging in particular
Sure.
places. But I'm
Sure.
happy to.
So sure, I must say that I haven't done historical, let's say, historical analysis of the street uses in Hong Kong, but I must say that there are some street uses. So, for example, in the paper, I describe one of the trajectories of these streets, pedestrian streets, that are streets where there are street markets or food markets, and in these cases, the policies and planning, would say, they are repeated in a similar pattern, and these streets are they're still planned and they're still proposed with some difference, with a more commercial oriented approach in the city, and these definitely are part of the street use and are part of the ways in which the street is used in East Asia. So for either small scale commerce or food.
Yeah.
So food stall and food activities.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Any further thoughts or questions or comments? You can also write something in the chat if you want to. Thank you. Yeah, that makes things a little easier. Okay. Yeah, I thought it was really marvelous, Caterina. Thank you very much. And I think it's a really promising new avenue for building upon your work on the domestic servants that you showed in Amsterdam. I wanted to announce before people are leaving that we have our next talk on the 3rd of April, and that will be given by Vikas Mehta, who just left because he had to go to another meeting. One of the challenges we have with this platform, obviously, is that people are based across the globe, so we have to sort of pick a time that is reasonably manageable. So Vikas will speak on the 3rd of April, and then on the 5th of June we have another talk, and we are still looking for a volunteer, and that can be anyone from any discipline who works on streets. So as you've seen, we're historians, we're geographers, we're computer scientists, we also have archaeologists, etc. So if you have a project that you would like to talk about, or you know a colleague who might be interested, please let us know. For those of you who want to join the email list, please send an email to claimingthestreets@gmail.com so we can add you to the list. And also, if you want, we can add you as a member. Okay, I think that's that for now. And I hope to see you soon in April, or soonish in April. We will post this video online in a few weeks, I hope, so you can look at it again if you want to. Thank you very much, and thank you, Caterina.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I will stop the